Imagine being betrayed by the people you love the most, your own flesh and blood. Imagine staring into your son's eyes, expecting warmth and protection, but finding only cold calculation, and then being shoved into the dark, endless ocean to die. This is not just a story of survival, it's a story of brutal revenge, one that proves sometimes blood is the sharpest weapon. Margaret Holloway was 6 to 7 years old, a widow, and the unlikely queen of a $6 billion tech empire. She hadn't built the fortune herself, that was her late husband, Richard Holloway's genius, but she had inherited it after his sudden death 2 years earlier. And with his passing, Margaret thought the worst was behind her. She was wrong. Her only son, Daniel, and his glamorous wife, Veronica, had invited her on a luxury celebration cruise. The reason, they claimed, was simple: to toast Margaret's recovery from a hip surgery that had nearly crippled her last winter. The yacht gleamed white in the Boston harbor, a floating palace. Margaret, dressed in a soft blue shawl, stepped carefully aboard, leaning on her cane. Daniel greeted her with exaggerated warmth, kissing her cheek. "Mother," he said smoothly, "this is about us as a family. Just laughter, champagne, and the sea breeze. No business talk." Margaret smiled faintly. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe them both. Veronica emerged in a silk dress, her lipstick a violent shade of red. "You look wonderful," she purred. "So strong after everything. This trip will be unforgettable." She was right, but not in the way Margaret expected. At first, it felt almost normal. Music playing softly. Champagne glasses clinking. Daniel kept her entertained with stories of his consulting firm, a business that never seemed to pay dividends yet always required more of Margaret's financial support. Veronica, meanwhile, sat close, her phone in hand, recording snippets of conversation under the guise of taking selfies. But as the night wore on, the mask began to slip. "So, Mom," Daniel began, swirling his drink casually, "have you thought more about, simplifying your trust? Maybe setting things up so there's less confusion if anything ever happened to you?" Margaret's eyes narrowed. "Anything," she repeated. Veronica leaned forward, placing her manicured hand on Margaret's arm. "It's just smart planning. I mean, no offense, you've had memory issues, right? You mixed up your medications just last month." Margaret stiffened. That mix-up had nearly killed her. The pills had been wrong, yes, but she knew she hadn't made the mistake. And now the way Veronica said it, so smooth, so rehearsed, it sent a chill through her. Her gaze darted to the phone Veronica held half-hidden under the table. Recording. Always recording. Her heart sank. By midnight, the yacht cut through the waves under a moonlit sky. Daniel suggested fresh air, and they moved to the deck. The Atlantic stretched around them like black glass, endless and silent. That's when Margaret finally said it. "Take me back to shore. Now." Her son's smile froze. Veronica's eyes glittered with something cruel. "Mother," Daniel murmured, "you're overreacting." But Margaret saw it, the plan. The little rehearsed lines, the probing about her will, the subtle undermining of her memory. This wasn't love. This was a setup. She backed toward the rail. "I know what you're doing." And then it happened. Veronica's voice dropped to a whisper as she stepped close, lips curling like a predator. "Say hi to the sharks." With a sudden, violent shove, she pushed. Margaret toppled over the rail. Her scream cut through the night as she hit the freezing water. The yacht's lights blurred above her, then shrank into the distance. They had left her to die. But Margaret Holloway was no ordinary victim. The cold shock of the Atlantic nearly stopped her heart, but her body remembered. Years of swimming at Cape Cod, summers with Richard, endless laps in the pool. She kicked, fought, clawed her way to the surface. Her lungs burned, but rage burned hotter. She would not die here. Not like this. Not at their hands. Hours blurred together until the distant hum of an engine reached her ears. A fishing boat, small but sturdy, drew near. Its captain, Jacob Morrison, spotted her thrashing and hauled her aboard with the help of his teenage grandson, Tyler. "Sweet Lord," Jacob muttered, wrapping her in a blanket. "How the hell are you alive out here?" Margaret clutched his arm, shivering violently, but her voice was sharp as glass. "You tell no one," she rasped. "No police, no reporters. Not yet." The old fisherman frowned, but the fire in her eyes silenced him. Because Margaret knew. This was no accident. This was war. And from this moment forward, she was no longer just a widow with a fortune. She was a woman with nothing to lose, a survivor betrayed by her own blood. And she was going to make them pay. That's just the beginning of Margaret's descent into darkness and revenge. What would you do if your own son and daughter-in-law tried to drown you for your fortune? Stay tuned, because this story only gets more brutal from here. And before we dive into the next chapter, don't forget, subscribe, like, and tell us where you're streaming from. They called it a celebration. Adrian and Cassandra, Eleanor Whitfield's beloved son and daughter-in-law, had spared no expense. A new yacht, the Sovereign Star, polished to gleaming perfection, was anchored at the Boston harbor. White linens dressed the tables, crystal glasses caught the setting sun, and waiters in pressed uniforms glided about with trays of champagne. To anyone watching, it looked like the perfect family gathering. A son honoring his mother. A daughter-in-law showing gratitude. A family united. But beneath that polished veneer lay something darker. Something Eleanor could feel in her bones. She was 68. A widow. Still recovering from hip surgery. And yet, she knew she was not fragile. Richard, her late husband, had left her not only a $7 billion fortune, but also a sharp mind trained by years of running Whitfield systems beside him. She wasn't easily fooled. Still, Adrian smiled too much that evening. Cassandra's laughter was too sweet, too rehearsed. Their eyes flickered to one another, almost in code. Eleanor noticed everything. The dinner was lavish, lobster tails, filet mignon, caviar. Cassandra poured the wine herself, insisting on the vintage Eleanor favored. But with the first sip, Eleanor sensed something was wrong. The taste was slightly off, the burn lingering. Her head felt heavy almost instantly, her words slower than usual. Adrian leaned in across the table, eyes gleaming. "Mother," he said softly, "you've done so much for us. But lately, I worry. You forget things sometimes. Do you remember when you left the stove on last month?" Eleanor's brow furrowed. She didn't leave the stove on. She never had. Cassandra's phone was face up on the table, recording. Her hand stroked Eleanor's arm in a mock display of tenderness. "We're just worried about you, Eleanor. You're not yourself these days." The haze grew thicker. The wine. They had drugged it. Eleanor tried to push her chair back, her voice sharper than they expected. "Take me to shore. Now." That was when Cassandra leaned close, her lips brushing Eleanor's ear, her whisper like venom. "Say hello to the sharks, Eleanor." And with one sudden, merciless shove, she sent Eleanor toppling over the rail. The Atlantic swallowed her whole. The water was black, icy, suffocating. Eleanor's chest burned as she kicked, her hips screaming in agony. Above, she saw the blurred image of Adrian and Cassandra peering over the edge. Adrian's face was still. Cassandra's lips curved into a smile. Then the yacht's engines roared, and they sailed away, leaving Eleanor to die. For a moment, panic clawed at her. The weight of betrayal was heavier than the ocean itself. Her own son. Her only child. She had carried him, raised him, defended him against his father's harshness. And now, he had chosen greed over blood. But Eleanor was not ready to die. Not here. Not like this. She fought, kicking hard against the waves. The training of her youth returned, long summers in Cape Cod when Richard was still just a dream in her future. She had been a strong swimmer once. That muscle memory saved her now. The current dragged her far from the yacht, her limbs numb, but she kept her head above water. Each gasp of air was a victory. Time blurred. Minutes, maybe hours, passed. Just as her strength began to fail, she heard a distant horn. Lights swept across the water. A fishing vessel, the Grey Gull. "Over here," she croaked, though her voice was little more than a whisper. She waved weakly, praying. Captain Samuel Rourke, grizzled and broad-shouldered, spotted her. His teenage grandson, Caleb, scrambled to throw a rope. Samuel hauled her aboard with the strength of a man half his age. Eleanor collapsed on the deck, soaked, trembling, but alive. "Who the hell are you?" Samuel demanded, startled by the sight of this elegant, half-drowned woman in pearls and silk. Eleanor's lips were blue, her voice ragged, but her eyes were fierce. "My name is Eleanor Whitfield," she rasped. "And my family just tried to kill me." Samuel exchanged a stunned glance with Caleb. The name Whitfield was everywhere. Forbes covers, tech headlines, political donations. If what she said was true, this wasn't just family drama. This was something bigger. Eleanor gripped Samuel's wrist with surprising strength. Please.
Don't tell anyone I'm alive. Not yet. He frowned.
Why not? Because if they know I survived, Eleanor whispered, they'll come back to finish the job. And this time,
I might not be so lucky.
The ocean lapped against the hull, as if sealing her vow. Eleanor Whitfield had been pushed into the abyss by her own flesh and blood.
But she would not be erased. Adrian and Cassandra thought they had killed her. They thought they had won.
They had no idea that the widow they betrayed had just been reborn. And what was coming for them would be colder than the ocean. Imagine being shoved into the dark ocean by the very people who should protect you, your own son, your daughter-in-law. They thought Eleanor Whitfield was gone. But they were wrong.
She was alive.
And her revenge had only just begun. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and tell us where you're streaming from, because you won't believe what happens when Eleanor strikes back. The grey gull rocked gently against the Atlantic swells as Eleanor Whitfield wrapped herself in a thick wool blanket. Her body shivered uncontrollably, but her mind burned with fury. Samuel Rourke poured her a steaming mug of coffee. His grandson, Caleb, hovered nearby, wide-eyed. He had never seen a woman like her, drenched in seawater yet radiating authority.
Why don't we call the Coast Guard?
Samuel asked, his voice rough but kind. They'll get you back to shore.
Eleanor shook her head firmly. No. If the news spreads that I survived, Adrian and Cassandra will know.
And they'll try again. I need them to believe I'm dead. Samuel leaned back, studying her. You're serious.
I've never been more serious in my life.
She explained in clipped sentences, her fortune, the yacht, the poisoned wine, the push. Samuel whistled low, realizing the gravity of what had just happened.
So your son and his wife tried to kill you?
Yes, Eleanor said bitterly. The boy I raised with my own hands, and the woman he chose.
They want it all. The money, the company,
the legacy. To them, I was just in the way. Her eyes darkened. But if they think I drowned, they'll reveal themselves.
And that's when I'll strike. Samuel nodded slowly.
He was no stranger to betrayal himself. He'd lost half his business once to a corrupt partner.
But this was something else entirely.
He agreed to help, and so instead of docking at the nearest port, Samuel steered the Grey Gull toward a secluded inlet, where an old friend of Eleanor's waited. Mai Lin, the owner of a quiet bed and breakfast tucked into the Massachusetts coastline. Mai Lin gasped when she saw Eleanor, soaked, pale, but alive.
My God, Eleanor.
What happened?
Betrayal, Eleanor replied flatly.
And I need your help to disappear. That night, as the storm raged outside, Eleanor lay awake in the small-in bedroom, her mind racing. She couldn't stop hearing Cassandra's whisper, say hello to the sharks, and Adrian's silent, complicit stare. The betrayal was a poison, spreading deeper than the drugged wine ever could. She began to dig. Days later, disguised under a plain coat and scarf, Eleanor returned to Boston quietly, with Mai Lin's help. She entered her Beacon Hill mansion through the servants' entrance, careful not to trigger alarms. The house, once her sanctuary, now felt foreign, like a stage her son and his wife had repurposed for their cruel theater. In her late husband's study, she found what she had been searching for. Hidden inside a locked drawer was a thick folder labeled Project Eclipse. Her stomach turned as she flipped through the pages. Forged medical evaluations declaring her mentally declining. False pharmacy receipts pointing to a medication mix-up, one that had nearly killed her months earlier. Financial timelines marking her expected death and Adrian's takeover of the company. They had been planning this for over a year. But then came the worst discovery. From the back of the mansion, Eleanor heard it. A soft, high-pitched sound she had not expected. A baby's cry. Her pulse quickened. She followed the sound to a locked nursery door. Picking the lock with trembling hands, she pushed inside. There, in an ornate crib, lay a newborn boy. Documents stacked nearby told the story. A forged birth certificate, naming Cassandra as the mother. A schedule for feeding, with a nurse's handwriting. And at the top of the paperwork, Richard Elias Whitfield. They had stolen her late husband's name, slapped it on this child, and claimed him as their heir. But Eleanor dug deeper, and the truth hit her like a blade. The baby wasn't Cassandra's. He was born to a young surrogate, Emily Vargas, 19 years old, impoverished, and desperate. Emily had died during delivery under mysterious complications. Eleanor clenched the crib rail until her knuckles whitened.
She knew better. Emily's death was no accident. It was erasure, just like the erasure they had planned for her. Her fury crystallized. Adrian and Cassandra weren't just after money. They were rewriting bloodlines, fabricating heirs, building an empire of lies. And now, a helpless child was caught in their web. When Eleanor returned to My Lin's inn, she told her everything. My Lin listened, face pale. You can't fight this alone, Eleanor.
They are powerful. They are ruthless. I don't need power, Eleanor said coldly. I need proof. And once I have it, I'll burn their empire to the ground. Through My Lin, Eleanor was introduced to Victor Kane, a private investigator with a reputation for going where others wouldn't. A man with shadows in his past, and as Eleanor would later learn, an ex-FBI agent.
Victor agreed to take the case.
He followed the paper trail, tracing it back to Lancaster Reproductive Services, a discreet clinic for wealthy clients.
The records were damning.
Emily Vargas had signed a surrogacy contract.
She had died during delivery.
Her body had been cremated immediately, no autopsy performed.
It was murder disguised as tragedy. Victor went further.
He uncovered a name that appeared too many times in the background of similar cases. Miranda Steele, an attorney with an icy smile and a hidden empire. Steele ran what she called inheritance acceleration. In plain words, she made heirs rich faster, by manufacturing dementia, fabricating deaths, and silencing obstacles. At least 20 wealthy families had lost matriarchs and patriarchs under her care. And now, Eleanor realized, she herself had been one of Steele's latest targets. Her son had offered her life to a predator. That night, Eleanor stood by the window of My Lin's inn, the ocean crashing outside. She held a photograph of Emily Vargas, printed from the clinic's file. A teenager, smiling shyly into the camera, her whole life ahead of her. A life cut short for greed. Eleanor whispered to the photo, her voice trembling with rage. They thought they could erase you. But I will make sure the world knows your name. Then she looked out at the dark water, the same water she had nearly died in. Her eyes hardened. They wanted me to say hello to the sharks, she murmured. But soon, they'll learn what it feels like to be eaten alive. They thought Eleanor Whitfield was gone. They thought she would drown quietly, erased from history. But in the shadows, she was gathering proof, uncovering secrets more monstrous than her betrayal. And when she returned, she wouldn't come back as a victim. She would come back as the storm. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and tell us where you're streaming from, because in the next chapter, Eleanor begins her counter-strike.
And trust me, it gets darker.
Eleanor Whitfield had thought betrayal began and ended with her son. But the deeper Victor Kane dug, the more the truth unraveled like a rotten tapestry. Adrian and Cassandra weren't clever masterminds.
No, they were pawns.
Puppets dancing on strings pulled by someone far more dangerous. That name kept surfacing, Miranda Steele. A polished attorney with the perfect pedigree, Steele was known in Boston's elite circles as a fixer. She had a sharp wit, a reputation for discretion, and a Rolodex of clients that included politicians, CEOs, and heirs. But behind the smiles and tailored suits, she ran a black market empire. Her business model was simple, brutal, and effective. She called it inheritance acceleration. In her hands, old age wasn't a stage of life.
It was a countdown.
She and her network would fabricate dementia reports, bribe doctors, alter medical records, and, when necessary, arrange accidents. The heirs received their money faster, and Steele pocketed a cut. The evidence Victor uncovered was staggering. In the past 5 years alone, at least 20 estates had shifted suddenly to new heirs after unexpected deaths. Wealthy grandmothers who fell downstairs. Patriarchs who forgot to take life-saving medication. Couples who drowned in boating accidents. And woven into the fabric of each case was Steele. Victor slid the files across the table at My Lin's inn. Eleanor sat rigid, her hands steady even as her insides twisted.
They've done this before, Victor said quietly. You're not their first target. And you wouldn't have been the last. Eleanor stared down at the pages. Photos of victims.
Headlines describing their deaths as tragic accidents. Bank transfers funneled through shell corporations into Steele's accounts. Adrian's signature appeared in the margins of contracts. Cassandra's initials dotted payment slips.
It wasn't just betrayal. It was business.
Her own son had sold her life to Miranda Steele like she was a stock to be liquidated. The discovery of the baby made everything darker. Emily Vargas's face haunted Eleanor, the 19-year-old surrogate who had died giving birth to Richard Elias Whitfield.
She should have been protected. Instead, she was erased.
Victor dug further and uncovered the truth. Lancaster Reproductive Services was no ordinary clinic.
It was Steele's pipeline for heirs.
Surrogates were recruited, often vulnerable women with little support. Their babies were handed over to wealthy clients desperate for legitimacy. And if the surrogate asked too many questions, she vanished. Emily Vargas had been one of those vanishings. Eleanor pressed her fingers to the photograph of the child, her so-called grandson, stolen into her bloodline under false pretenses.
"They think this baby is a pawn," she whispered. "But he's not. He's a living witness.
And I will protect him with everything I have left." While Eleanor plotted, Adrian and Cassandra thrived. News outlets covered Eleanor's disappearance at sea. Tearful statements poured from Adrian. "We lost our beloved mother too soon."
She was struggling.
She wasn't herself.
Cassandra played the grieving daughter-in-law flawlessly.
Cameras caught her placing flowers at the harbor, dabbing fake tears with a silk handkerchief. Their performance was so convincing that the public mourned with them.
Behind closed doors, though, they celebrated. They moved into Eleanor's Beacon Hill mansion.
Cassandra redecorated with gaudy chandeliers and gold accents, stripping away Eleanor's subtle elegance. Adrian threw parties, introducing himself as the rightful heir to Whitfield Systems. But one evening, as Cassandra tucked the baby into his crib, she noticed something unsettling. A note, resting on the pillow. "Reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated. We need to talk. Love, Mother. P.S. Kiss little Richard Elias for me."
Cassandra's scream echoed through the house.
Adrian rushed in, face pale as he read the words. The paper trembled in his hand. "She's alive."
Cassandra shook her head violently.
"Impossible."
"We watched her fall. We watched her drown." But doubt had taken root.
For the first time, fear crept into their home. Eleanor was already tightening the noose. She had revealed herself to Caroline Hughes, the baby's nurse. Caroline had no idea of the deception surrounding the child. When Eleanor explained, the young woman's shock turned to resolve. She agreed to spy from within, planting hidden cameras and microphones throughout the mansion. Within days, the recordings piled up. Adrian ranting about mother's billions. Cassandra bragging about Project Eclipse. And, most chilling of all, phone calls with Miranda Steele, planning Eleanor's final erasure. Eleanor now held the smoking gun.
But she didn't strike immediately. Revenge required timing. Precision. Instead, she chose to haunt them. The note had been the first move.
The next would be her presence. One evening, Adrian and Cassandra returned from a meeting with Steele to find Eleanor seated in her late husband's favorite armchair, calmly cradling the baby.
The room froze in silence.
Adrian's breath hitched.
Cassandra's nails dug into his arm.
"Hello, children," Eleanor said coolly. "Did you miss me?" She pressed play on a recorder. Their own voices filled the room, confessing, plotting, damning themselves. "You've been very busy," Eleanor said, her tone sharper than glass. "Forging my dementia, forging heirs, forging death itself. But Massachusetts law requires only one-party consent for recordings.
And guess what?
I was there." Adrian sputtered, trying to deny it. Cassandra's face twisted into a mask of rage.
But Eleanor silenced them with a single glance.
"You have 24 hours, she declared.
"Return my fortune.
Confess your crimes. And ensure that this child's adoption is made legal and transparent. If you fail," her smile was thin, merciless, "I will bury you with the evidence you created." She stood, the baby in her arms, and left them shaking in her wake.
Her enemies thought she was a ghost.
But Eleanor Whitfield wasn't haunting them. She was hunting them. And Adrian and Cassandra were only beginning to understand what it meant to betray the wrong woman. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and tell us where you're streaming from, because in the next chapter, the killers hire someone darker than themselves.
And Eleanor? She's ready for war. Revenge isn't about rage.
It isn't about screaming in the streets or waving weapons in the air.
No. True revenge is quiet. Cold. Calculated.
And Eleanor Whitfield had learned patience. After confronting Adrian and Cassandra with their own confessions, she disappeared again, melting into the shadows.
She knew they would not surrender willingly.
No, greed had already poisoned their veins too deeply.
They would fight to keep her fortune.
But Eleanor wasn't fighting for money. She was fighting for her dignity, her legacy, and the innocent life of a child.
The widow's counterstrike had begun. The first step was to dismantle their power base. Adrian had always been weak, a man who wore his father's last name like armor. Without Eleanor's wealth, he was nothing. Cassandra, however, was dangerous. Smart. Manipulative. And worse, she had Miranda Steele in her corner. So Eleanor struck at Steele first. Victor Kane hacked into Steele's encrypted files. Hidden among thousands of contracts and falsified medical records was one key piece of leverage: Steele's involvement in the mysterious death of Senator Charles Hightower. Hightower had been a beloved figure in Massachusetts politics, a man who promised reforms that threatened corporate interests. His sudden boating accident raised eyebrows at the time, but no evidence was ever found. Until now. Steele's voice was captured in a wire transfer note. Accident arranged. Payment complete. Victor leaned back in his chair. If this goes public, Steele's entire empire collapses. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. Then that's our weapon. We're not just going to expose them. We're going to make them turn on each other. Step 2. Sow paranoia. Adrian and Cassandra received anonymous envelopes. Inside were photos of their late-night meetings, records of stolen funds, and a transcript of their phone calls with Steele. No return address. No explanation. At first, Adrian thought Steele was testing their loyalty. Cassandra, however, suspected Eleanor. She's alive, Cassandra hissed, pacing their gilded bedroom. I don't care what anyone says. That woman didn't drown. She's mocking us. Adrian poured himself another drink, sweat glistening on his forehead. She can't be alive. We saw her fall. We saw the water swallow her. Cassandra grabbed his glass, smashing it against the wall. Then explain the notes. Explain the photos.
Adrian, she's coming for us.
Adrian said nothing. Because deep down, he feared Cassandra was right. While they unraveled, Eleanor built her own army. Caroline Hughes, the nurse, smuggled recordings out of the mansion. Mai Lin provided Eleanor safe refuge and funds through her in secret back channels. Victor handled the digital warfare. And then there was Rafael Cortez, an ex-cop turned private investigator who had once worked with Eleanor's late husband. He owed the Whitfield family a debt, and now he was ready to repay it. I don't need money, Rafael said, sliding a gun across the table. I need justice. And you, Eleanor, are the only one who still believes in it. With her team assembled, Eleanor no longer felt like a widow in mourning. She felt like a general preparing for war. Step 3. Reclaim her name. Cassandra had begun appearing in interviews, branding herself as the new matriarch of Whitfield Systems. Adrian posed beside her, a glossy smile plastered across his face. They announced plans to restructure the company, sell off divisions, and pocket millions. Eleanor watched from the shadows, fury burning in her chest. So she hijacked their spotlight. At a high-profile gala celebrating Whitfield Systems' expansion, the press swarmed Adrian and Cassandra as they arrived in glittering attire. Cameras flashed. Champagne glasses clinked. Then the lights dimmed. A massive projector screen flickered to life. And there she was. Eleanor Whitfield. Her voice cut through the room like ice. To all shareholders, employees, and citizens of Boston, I am alive. I was betrayed, not lost. And I have the proof. Gasps rippled through the crowd as Eleanor laid out the evidence: forged medical records, stolen funds, audio of Cassandra's plotting, and Steele's recorded payment for the senator's accident. The footage ended with Eleanor staring directly into the camera. You thought you buried me. But the earth spits out poison. Pandemonium erupted. Adrian collapsed into a chair. Cassandra stormed out, shoving past reporters. Steele, watching from her office across town, hurled a glass against the wall. The widow had struck. But victory wasn't complete. Not yet. Because Eleanor knew her enemies too well. Cornered animals don't surrender. They fight. They bite. And Steele, especially, would never allow herself to fall alone. True enough, within hours, Steele summoned Adrian and Cassandra to her penthouse. The polished veneer was gone. Her words dripped venom. You idiots let her survive, Steele spat. Do you know what that means? It means she'll destroy everything we've built. Cassandra clenched her fists. Then we destroy her first. Steele leaned forward, her eyes burning. No more games. This time, we finish the widow. The battlefield had been drawn, Eleanor Whitfield against her son, his wife, and the empire of Miranda Steele. The first blow was hers. But the next, would be deadly.
Because the hunters were now hiring killers. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and tell us where you're streaming from, because the war is only beginning, and in the next chapter, Eleanor discovers just how far her enemies will go to silence her forever.
They thought they could erase me.
They thought money, lawyers, and lies could bury me at the bottom of the Atlantic. But the deeper you push a secret, the harder it claws its way back up to the surface. And now, my son Adrian and his poisonous wife Cassandra were about to learn I wasn't just alive.
I was watching, waiting, and planning.
The night after I revealed myself in their mansion, sitting in Richard's armchair with a baby in my arms, the panic was written all over their faces. Cassandra's fake smile cracked like shattered glass, and Adrian's hands trembled. I'd given them 24 hours to return my fortune, confess their crimes, and ensure the baby's legal adoption.
But I knew my son.
He was his father's child, arrogant, entitled, convinced rules were for other people.
He wouldn't surrender. He'd escalate. And I was right.
By morning, my investigator, Victor Kane, intercepted the chatter. Cassandra hadn't gone to church, and Adrian hadn't gone to his office.
No.
They were in a penthouse suite at the Harbor Grand Hotel, meeting Miranda Steele, the woman behind the inheritance murders.
She was the spider at the center of the web. And she didn't waste time.
She's alive, Cassandra hissed, her voice sharp on Victor's hidden recorder. She has the baby. She's got evidence. Miranda's reply was calm, measured, like someone discussing the weather. Then we remove her. Permanently. That was when I heard the words that froze my veins. I'll send the cleaner.
The cleaner. I knew what that meant. Someone who wouldn't hesitate.
Someone who'd make my death look like an accident. Or worse, make me and the baby vanish without a trace. But Miranda had made a mistake.
She underestimated me. Again.
Samuel Rourke, the fisherman who'd saved me from the sea, stood in my kitchen that night, his face grim. Caleb, his grandson, leaned against the wall, eyes wide. Mai Lin, our steadfast innkeeper ally, poured tea but her hands shook.
They are sending someone, I told them.
Someone trained.
This isn't Adrian's tantrum or Cassandra's scheming.
This is professional.
Samuel nodded.
Then we don't wait for them to come to us.
We make them walk into a trap.
Victor spread blueprints across the table. The Whitfield mansion, the Beacon Hill estate that Adrian and Cassandra had claimed as their own. They'll expect you to hide, he said. But if you return home, they'll think you've given up. That's when they'll strike. And we'll be ready.
I stared at the diagrams, at the places I'd once called mine.
The corridors, the grand staircase, the balcony where Richard once toasted his empire.
All of it had become a battlefield. I would reclaim it. On my terms. 2 nights later, the trap was set. Cameras hidden in the chandeliers.
Microphones in the vents. Victor himself positioned across the street with a rifle, not to kill, but to protect.
And me?
I was exactly where they expected, sitting in that same armchair, rocking baby Richard Elias to sleep. It was midnight when I heard it, the creak of the back door, the whisper of shoes against marble. My heart hammered, but my hands were steady. I pressed the baby's ear gently against my chest so he wouldn't hear the storm brewing. A shadow moved through the hall.
Taller than Adrian.
Bulkier than Cassandra. He didn't hesitate, didn't speak. He wore black from head to toe, his face masked. The cleaner. He carried a syringe in one hand, a silencer in the other.
And he moved like a man who'd done this too many times before.
I let him approach.
10 feet.
5 feet. Then I whispered, "You've come for me, haven't you?" He froze, startled. They always think their prey will be sleeping, unaware, weak.
But I was none of those things.
I was awake.
Aware. Hungry for revenge.
"You're making a mistake, lady,"
he muttered, voice muffled by his mask.
"No," I said, staring straight into his eyes. "The mistake was theirs, sending you."
I pressed a button under the armrest. The mansion roared to life.
Floodlights blazed, cameras whirred, alarms shrieked. And from across the street, Victor's laser sight painted a red dot squarely on the cleaner's chest. The man froze.
His syringe clattered to the floor.
"Step away from the child," Victor's voice thundered through the mansion's speakers. The cleaner hesitated only a second before bolting toward the back door.
But he never made it.
A sharp crack split the night, not from Victor's rifle, but from somewhere deeper. We later learned Miranda herself had been watching, and when the cleaner fled, she eliminated him.
She didn't tolerate loose ends.
When his body was found in the alley hours later, it was clear Miranda had killed her own man to protect herself.
That was when I realized something chilling.
Miranda Steele wasn't just covering her tracks. She was tying them into a noose around Adrian and Cassandra's necks.
And once she was done using them,
they'd be next. I looked down at baby Richard, his tiny fingers wrapped around mine.
My family had betrayed me. My son had abandoned me.
But this child, this innocent life, was worth every ounce of fight I had left. And I swore then, Miranda Steele would not win.
She wanted to bury me at sea. Instead, I'd bury her empire of blood. The war wasn't coming. The war had begun.
And as the night closed in, one truth became clearer than ever. They hadn't just failed to kill me, they'd awakened something far more dangerous.
A mother's wrath. A widow's vengeance.
And when I was finished, there would be no mercy. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and tell us where you're streaming from.
Because the story of what came next only gets darker. They thought they'd erased me. Then they thought they could send a killer.
But when Miranda Steele pulled the trigger on her own cleaner, I finally understood the truth. This wasn't just about my son Adrian and his snake of a wife, Cassandra.
No, this was about an entire machine.
A network built on silencing widows, harvesting fortunes, and leaving graves where families once stood. And I wasn't about to let them write me into their tally of victims. I was going to burn their empire down. The morning after the failed assassination, Victor Kane slid a manila envelope across my Lynn's kitchen table. Inside were photos, phone records, and financial transfers. He spoke in his steady, clipped way, but every word carried weight.
This is bigger than Adrian. Bigger than Cassandra.
Miranda Steele has been running what she calls an inheritance acceleration program. She's got judges, doctors, and estate lawyers in her pocket.
25 deaths traced.
Maybe more.
I forced myself to look at the photos. Gray-haired widows. Men in their 70s. All smiling in family portraits, all dead within months of their spouses.
Their wealth redistributed neatly to greedy children, manipulated spouses, or hidden accounts. The pattern was unmistakable. They prey on people like me, I whispered. Elderly, wealthy, vulnerable. Samuel Rourke leaned back, his weathered face hard as granite. Then you turn their weapon against them.
I met his eyes. He was right.
For years, Miranda Steele had been orchestrating inheritances like symphonies of death. Now it was time she learned what it felt like to be the one in the crosshairs.
That evening, I called Adrian. My voice calm, measured.
Adrian, I said, we need to meet.
Just you. No Cassandra. No Miranda. At the mansion.
Tomorrow night.
He hesitated. I could almost hear Cassandra whispering poison in his ear.
Finally, he said,
fine.
But if this is another one of your games.
It's not a game, I cut in.
It's your last chance to prove you're still my son.
I hung up before he could answer.
The next night, I sat in the grand dining room where Richard once signed million-dollar contracts. The chandeliers glowed soft gold, the long mahogany table polished to a mirror shine. And at the head of it sat me, dressed in black, a single folder in front of me. Adrian arrived late, of course.
He always did.
Cassandra's perfume clung to him even though she hadn't followed inside. He looked tired, jittery, his arrogance cracking at the edges. You're alive, he said flatly, sliding into a chair. Disappointed? I asked.
He didn't answer.
I opened the folder and slid it across the table. Inside, photos of him and Cassandra with Miranda Steele. Bank transfers into offshore accounts. Recordings of them discussing my dementia. And the clincher. The forged birth certificate naming Cassandra as mother to little Richard Elias. Adrian's face drained of color. I want you to understand something, I said. My voice was steady, but inside I was trembling with a rage I'd been suppressing for months. You didn't just try to kill me.
You stole from me. You mocked my love.
And worst of all, you tried to erase your own son's bloodline by inventing a false heir. That baby isn't mine, Adrian spat, though his hands shook. He's more yours than you'll ever admit, I shot back. Born of a girl you discarded. A girl who died because of you. For a flicker of a moment, I saw it, the guilt. But it was buried quickly under layers of arrogance and denial. You can't stop Miranda, he said, almost smugly.
She owns the courts. The doctors.
Even the FBI has people on her payroll. Then I'll burn down her entire web, I said, standing. And if you don't get out of my way, Adrian, you'll burn with it.
Adrian stormed out that night. But I didn't stop him.
Because I knew where he'd go, straight back to Cassandra, straight back to Miranda Steele.
And that was exactly what I wanted.
Victor was already tracking his phone.
We followed them from the mansion to a discreet warehouse near the docks.
Inside, we saw them gather, Miranda, Cassandra, Adrian, and 2 judges I recognized from Richard's old estate dealings.
They were laughing, drinking, planning my second death.
But what they didn't know was that every word was being recorded. Caroline Hughes, the baby's nurse, had planted microphones days earlier. And what those microphones captured would shake Massachusetts to its core. Miranda's voice dripped with venom. Eleanor thinks she's clever. But clever doesn't beat ruthless. Tomorrow night, we'll make it look like a gas leak at her inn. My Lynn will go up in smoke with her.
Cassandra laughed.
And the baby? We'll make sure there's no trace, Miranda replied coldly. Adrian was silent for a long moment before finally muttering, "Do it."
My own son.
Approving the murder of his mother, his child, and everyone who had risked their lives to protect us. It was in that moment, standing in the shadows outside that warehouse, that my heart hardened into something unrecognizable.
I had once thought of revenge as justice.
But no. This was personal now. Adrian wasn't just complicit, he was lost. And if I didn't stop them, no one would.
The plan shifted. No more subtle threats, no more whispered warnings.
I would make Miranda Steele's empire crumble in broad daylight. I would drag every accomplice into the light. And Adrian, my own flesh and blood, would learn the price of betrayal. I looked at Victor, Samuel, and my Lynn. Tomorrow, I said, my voice low, steady, and final, we set the trap. And this time, there will be no survivors.
They thought they could snuff me out with a shove into the ocean.
But when a widow rises from the waves, she rises ready for war.
And Adrian, Cassandra,
Miranda Steele, they were about to discover just how far a mother's wrath could reach. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and tell us where you're streaming from, because the storm that's coming next,
it's going to drown them all. Revenge isn't born in a moment.
It's brewed, simmering over betrayal, fueled by every whispered lie and every stab in the back.
By now, my vengeance was no longer a choice. It was survival.
Adrian, Cassandra, and Miranda Steele had set their sights on eliminating me, my allies, and even the baby. But they'd made a fatal miscalculation.
They thought I was alone. They thought I was weak.
They forgot I had been Richard Whitfield's wife for 40 years. I had watched empires rise and fall. And I had learned how to fight in shadows darker than they could imagine. The morning after the warehouse meeting, Victor slid another file across my Lynn's table. He called it Project Eclipse. Inside were documents so detailed, so vile, they turned my stomach.
There was a timeline.
My hip surgery, the accidental medication mix-up, the forged dementia diagnosis. Even the night on the Sovereign Star when Cassandra pushed me into the ocean, it was all written down like an itinerary for murder.
And the worst part? My name wasn't the only one.
24 other wealthy elders, all neatly catalogued.
The dates of their staged deaths. The fabricated medical records.
The transfer of estates to heirs who didn't deserve a dime. Miranda Steele hadn't just been orchestrating murders.
She'd been industrializing them.
This is the smoking gun, Victor said, his eyes cold. With this file, we can take Steele down.
But Samuel shook his head.
Evidence means nothing if the wrong judge sees it. Steele's got half the system on her payroll.
He was right.
Evidence alone wouldn't topple Miranda. I had to force her to incriminate herself, with her own words. That night, Caroline Hughes, the baby's nurse, sent me a text. They are planning something tomorrow.
Steele is coming to the mansion herself. It was the opportunity I'd been waiting for. We wired the house top to bottom. Hidden microphones in the chandeliers. Cameras in the vents.
FBI agents, tipped off by Victor's old contacts, waiting in unmarked vans down the street.
It was risky.
If Miranda suspected a trap, she'd kill me before backup arrived. But I wasn't afraid anymore.
My enemies had tried to drown me. Tried to poison me.
Tried to erase me. If this was the final battle, I was ready to meet it head-on. The following evening, I sat in Richard's leather armchair, cradling little Richard Elias, my heartbeat steady as a drum. At precisely 9 o'clock, the front doors burst open. Adrian and Cassandra entered first, their faces pale with fury.
And then she followed. Miranda Steele. She was taller than I expected, dressed in a navy suit that radiated confidence. Her eyes were sharp, predatory. The kind of eyes that measured a person not by their soul, but by their usefulness. "Well, Eleanor," she said smoothly, stepping into the room. "You've proven resilient." I met her gaze. "You murdered Emily Vargas. You forged my records. You've killed dozens of people, all to line your pockets." Miranda's smile was razor-thin.
"And what are you going to do? Tell the police?"
"I own the police."
"Tell the courts?"
"I dine with the judges."
"Tell the doctors?" "They sign whatever papers I place in front of them." Her arrogance was her weakness. Every word out of her mouth was being recorded. Every smirk another nail in her coffin. Adrian slammed his fists against the table. "Enough of this. Just finish it, Miranda." Cassandra hissed, "Yes, before she ruins everything." Miranda raised a hand, silencing them both.
She turned her gaze back to me. "You should have drowned, Eleanor," she said. "You should have let the sharks have you. Instead, you've made yourself a nuisance. And nuisances are eliminated."
I held the baby tighter, letting her words hang in the air, letting every hidden microphone drink them in. "You want my empire,"
I said finally.
"You'll have to pry it from my dead hands."
Miranda's smile widened.
"That can be arranged."
She reached inside her blazer. And that's when the doors crashed open. FBI.
"Hands where we can see them."
The room erupted in chaos.
Agents swarmed in, weapons raised. Adrian stumbled back, pale as a ghost.
Cassandra screamed, clawing at the walls. And Miranda?
She didn't flinch. She pulled a pistol, aiming straight for me. I dove behind the armchair as bullets exploded into the air. Baby Richard wailed against my chest. Samuel tackled Cassandra, slamming her to the ground. Victor disarmed Adrian with a single, practiced blow.
And Miranda? She fought like a cornered animal.
She screamed curses, firing wildly, but she was outnumbered. Within minutes, she was on the floor, pinned under 3 agents, her wrists locked in steel cuffs. Even then, she laughed.
"You think this ends with me?" she spat. "You think I'm the only one? There are others. Bigger than me. Smarter than me.
You've won nothing."
But I had won.
Because every word she'd spoken, every boast, every threat, had been recorded. Project Eclipse wasn't just exposed, it was obliterated. As they dragged Miranda Steele out of my mansion, Adrian and Cassandra screamed.
They begged. They swore they had been manipulated, coerced. But the evidence was overwhelming. Their voices on tape. Their signatures on documents. Their hands are bloody with betrayal. My son. My only son.
And yet, in that moment, as he was shoved into the back of a squad car, I felt nothing. No grief.
No pity. Just an emptiness colder than the Atlantic Ocean.
They had chosen greed over family. Betrayal over loyalty. And for that, I could never forgive them.
They whispered I was too old. Too weak. Too broken to fight back.
But when they came for me, I gave them something the sharks never could, a taste of their own blood. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and tell us where you're streaming from, because the storm isn't over yet. The arrests were only the beginning.
The reckoning was still to come.
Revenge isn't just about punishing betrayal, it's about balance. And as Miranda Steele, Adrian, and Cassandra were hauled away in chains, I should have felt relief. Vindication.
Triumph.
But I didn't. The mansion was quiet after the chaos. Too quiet. Baby Richard slept fitfully in Caroline's arms, his tiny fists twitching as if he could sense the war still raging around him. I sat alone in Richard's old armchair, staring at the shattered glass across the marble floor, wondering if it was really over. And then Samuel walked in, his jaw tight, his face pale. "It's not finished, Eleanor," he said. Steele wasn't bluffing. There are others, bigger, more dangerous. Project Eclipse was just one piece of a much larger machine.
His words sat heavy in my chest. Because he was right.
Miranda Steele wasn't the head of the serpent.
She was just the fangs.
And somewhere out there, the body was still moving. The following morning, the news exploded. Steele Foundation CEO arrested in elder exploitation scandal. Heirs accused of murder conspiracy. The media devoured every detail, but the headlines only scratched the surface. They painted me as a grieving widow who had miraculously uncovered the plot. They showed grainy footage of Miranda screaming as the FBI dragged her away, Cassandra weeping in cuffs, Adrian hiding his face.
But the truth behind those headlines was darker. Victor spread the files across the dining table like a grim tapestry. Eleanor, Steele was working with offshore accounts linked to something called the Consortium. It's a network. Lawyers, doctors, financiers, even government officials. If Project Eclipse was their test run, then they've been planning something much larger. My Lynn leaned forward, her eyes sharp. This isn't about inheritance anymore. This is about control. Entire legacies, entire bloodlines, being erased for profit. And there it was, the realization that chilled me to the bone. Miranda Steele hadn't just wanted my fortune. She wanted to rewrite history itself. 4 days, I barely slept. Every creak in the mansion felt like an intruder. Every whisper of the wind through the windows felt like a warning. Caroline tried to soothe me, but even as I watched the baby sleep, I knew I wasn't safe. The arrest had exposed Steele. But it had also exposed me. I was no longer the prey. I was the target. And predators, they never forgive the one who fights back. Then came the first message. Slipped under the front door in the dead of night, written in bold black ink. You've only cut one head off the serpent. The others are watching. Waiting. And next time, we won't miss. I crushed the note in my fist, fury burning through me. They thought they could scare me back into silence. They thought they could remind me of my age, my fragility. But fear was no longer my enemy. Fear was my weapon. The reckoning began 2 weeks later, at the courthouse. Miranda Steele stood trial first. She looked nothing like the polished queenpin who had walked into my mansion. Her hair was unkempt, her suit wrinkled, her eyes bloodshot. And yet, she still smirked at me across the courtroom, as if she knew something I didn't. When the prosecution played the recordings, the admissions, the threats, the cold confessions, Miranda laughed. Not a nervous laugh. Not a broken laugh. A deliberate one. You think prison scares me, she said, her voice dripping with contempt. You have no idea what's coming. The jury recoiled. The judge banged his gavel. But her words echoed in my skull like a prophecy. Adrian and Cassandra fared no better. My son wept, begging the jury for forgiveness, blaming Miranda for everything. Cassandra, wild-eyed and trembling, tried to claw her way out of the witness box. Their downfall was pitiful. And yet, as I sat in the back of the courtroom, I felt no victory. Only dread. Because Samuel was right. Steele wasn't the end. She was just the beginning. That night, Victor gathered us in the study. If we're going to survive what's coming, we need to strike first. We can't wait for the consortium to move. We need to dismantle them, piece by piece. My Lynn added, they will come for the child. That baby is the key. If they can erase him, your bloodline dies with you. My heart clenched. I looked at Richard Elias sleeping in his cradle, his breath soft and shallow. My grandson. My legacy. I made my decision then and there. We don't run, I said, my voice steady. We don't hide. We fight. And this time, we burn the whole rotten empire down. But the consortium moved faster than I anticipated. 2 days later, Caroline was ambushed outside the hospital. A black SUV tried to ram her car off the road. She barely escaped with the baby, her hands shaking as she told me what happened. Then Victor received a phone call from an unknown number. A voice, distorted and mechanical, warned him, hand over the files, or watch the widow die. It wasn't just a threat. It was a declaration of war. They thought they had silenced me with poison, with lies, with betrayal. They thought drowning me would erase me. But I didn't drown, I survived. And now? Now I was coming for them. The reckoning had begun. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and tell us where you're streaming from, because in the next chapter, we'll step into the shadows of the consortium, where the Real monsters wait. You know, people say the elderly should sit quietly, knit, sip tea, and wait for the end. But what they don't understand is this: when you've been pushed into the abyss and clawed your way back, you don't fear the dark anymore. You become the dark. And that's exactly what I had to do, because the consortium had made their move, and if I wanted to keep Richard Elias safe, I had to move faster. Victor spread out the files again on the study table. Thousands of pages, bank records, sealed court documents, falsified medical reports, all pointing to a massive web of corruption. He traced his finger along a name. Dr. Evelyn Harrow. Neurologist. Boston General. She's falsified dozens of dementia reports for heirs like Adrian. Paid handsomely by Steele's clients. Samuel leaned over, his voice gravelly. So she pretends people are losing their minds, then the heirs swoop in and take everything. Victor nodded. Exactly. She's not the only one. There's a network of them. Steele was just their lawyer. The consortium is bigger: judges, doctors, accountants, politicians. They erase people, Eleanor. Quietly. Efficiently. My blood ran cold.
Because I remembered sitting in Harrow's office last year, listening as she tried to convince me I was showing early cognitive decline.
The smirk on her face when she said it. The condescension. I hadn't realized then how deep the knife had been twisting. Now I did.
We start with Harrow, I said firmly. If she built the lies, then we tear her lies apart.
Victor hesitated.
Eleanor, going after them puts you directly in their sights.
I smiled bitterly.
Victor, I've been in their sights since the moment my son smiled as his wife pushed me off that yacht.
The plan was simple: infiltration. Not by brute force, by exposure.
With my Lynn's connections, we slipped into Boston General under the pretense of a routine checkup. Caroline carried Richard Elias in her arms, playing the role of a nervous nanny.
Samuel posed as my driver. And Victor?
He walked in as a hospital consultant, his forged ID badge shining like a seal of truth.
We found Harrow's office on the 5th floor.
A plaque outside her door gleamed: Dr. Evelyn Harrow, Chief of Neurology. She looked up when I entered, her fake warmth spreading across her face.
Mrs. Whitfield. What a surprise. I thought you'd died.
I cut her off, my voice sharp as glass.
Her smile faltered. I leaned closer across her desk.
You nearly made that true, didn't you?
Writing those lies about my mind. Bribing my doctor.
Signing papers that could have stripped me of everything.
Her pen froze midair. For the first time, I saw fear flicker in her eyes.
Victor closed the door behind us, locking it. Dr. Harrow, here's what happens now.
You tell us who paid you.
You give us every document, every name, every account number. Or Eleanor here makes you the first doctor in history to be diagnosed with sudden, unexplained memory loss.
The threat hung heavy in the air. And then Harrow cracked. She opened her files.
Names spilled out like poison. Judges in Massachusetts, bankers in New York, surgeons in Florida, all part of the same machine. One name made Victor's face harden.
Senator William Darden, he read aloud. A sitting U.S. senator. My heart pounded.
This wasn't just inheritance fraud anymore.
This was power, political power, government power. The consortium wasn't feeding off scraps.
They were dining at the table of the nation. We walked out of Harrow's office with enough evidence to bury her 10 times over.
But I knew better than to celebrate. Because predators don't bleed quietly.
That night, as we drove back to Beacon Hill, headlights flared in the rearview mirror.
Too close. Too fast.
Hold on, Samuel barked, swerving the wheel. A black SUV roared behind us, then slammed into the bumper of our car. Caroline screamed, clutching the baby tight. Another SUV appeared ahead, blocking the road.
We were trapped.
Victor yanked his gun from under his coat, eyes sharp.
Consortium cleaners.
They want the files, and the baby.
My blood turned to ice.
Samuel spun the car down a side street, tires screeching. We bolted out, ducking into the shadows of the alleyways, every footstep echoing like thunder in my chest. Caroline clutched Richard Elias close, whispering prayers. My Lynn pulled her shawl tighter, her face pale but fierce.
Then, shots rang out.
Bullets pinged against the brick walls. Victor returned fire, steady as steel. The alley lit up with the chaos of muzzle flashes.
And me?
I clutched the baby bag tighter, my hands shaking. For a moment, I was back in the ocean, drowning, the salt stinging my throat. Only this time, the sharks weren't beneath me.
They were all around me. We barely escaped.
Samuel led us through a maze of backstreets, his years at sea guiding him even on land. By the time we reached the mansion again, dawn was breaking, painting the sky a bruised shade of purple. I sank into Richard's old armchair, my chest heaving. Caroline placed the baby in my arms. His tiny eyes blinked up at me, unaware of the storm raging around him. And in that moment, I swore to him, silently, fiercely. I will not let them take you. I will not let them erase you. If they want war, then war is what they'll get.
They thought pushing me off a yacht would end me. They thought erasing my mind with lies would silence me.
But I'm still here. And if the consortium wants to drag me into the shadows, then they'll learn one thing: Widows fight hardest when they have nothing left to lose. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and tell us where you're streaming from, because in the next chapter, you'll see just how far I'm willing to go to protect my grandson and how deep the consortium's darkness really runs. They say family is everything. But what happens when family becomes the weapon aimed at your heart? That's the question I faced as dawn broke over Boston, with Richard Elias sleeping in my arms and the consortium breathing down our necks. Because the truth was finally clear, this wasn't just about money anymore. It was about blood. My grandson's blood. The Whitfield bloodline. And the consortium wanted it all. Victor slammed the files Harrow gave us onto the table. Eleanor, they know about Richard Elias. They know he's the last Whitfield heir. I stared down at the pages, my chest tightening. Medical reports, forged birth certificates, death certificates, all rewritten, edited, and rearranged by the consortium's hand. What do they want with a child? My Lynn asked, her voice trembling. Victor's jaw clenched. Legitimacy. Families like yours are targets, Eleanor. With Adrian gone and Cassandra dead, the baby is the sole heir. If they control him, they control the fortune, the company, the legacy. They are not just stealing money. They are building dynasties. Samuel swore under his breath. They want to raise him like a pawn. No, I whispered fiercely, holding Richard Elias tighter. They'll never have him. Not while I breathe. That morning, we received the first message. It wasn't a phone call. It wasn't an email. It was a funeral wreath, left at the front gate of the Beacon Hill mansion. A note pinned to it read, "Blood must flow to keep the line strong. Deliver the child." Caroline gasped when she saw it, her arms shaking. Samuel picked up the wreath and snapped it in half, fury burning in his eyes. But I felt the ice of rage slide through my veins. They thought I would hand over my grandson? They thought I would give up Richard Elias, the only piece of me that was pure, uncorrupted? They didn't know me at all. Victor gathered us in the study. We can't just defend, Eleanor. We have to strike back. Harrow gave us a map, and at the top of it, Senator William Darden. Here's the political shield. The consortium uses him to silence investigations, to bury scandals. I asked the only question that mattered. Then how do we cut him down? Victor's eyes gleamed. Exposure. But it won't be easy. He's protected by state police, FBI contacts, and half the judiciary. We'll need proof that even he can't escape. My Lynn lifted her chin. Then we find the proof. Our hunt began that night. Victor and I slipped into an exclusive fundraiser Darden was hosting at the Fairmorn Copley Plaza. The chandeliers glittered like cages of diamonds, the guests laughing and sipping champagne, oblivious to the blood dripping behind the curtain. Darden stood at the center, charming donors, his smile warm enough to melt glass. But I saw it for what it was, a mask. Victor nudged me. Watch. We lingered by the balcony, pretending to admire the view. Minutes later, a young aide slipped Darden a folder. He opened it, his grin never faltering, but his eyes darkened. Inside were reports from the consortium's doctors, detailing their next targets. Elderly names. Wealthy. Vulnerable. And at the bottom of the list, my name. Eleanor Whitfield. I bit back a laugh. They were still writing me off, even as I stood in the same room. But then I saw something that froze me. The name beneath mine. Richard Elias Whitfield. Barely 6 months old, and already marked for erasure. We followed Darden after the gala, shadowing him through the city. He drove to a brownstone in Cambridge, slipping inside through a private garage. Victor picked the lock, and together we crept into the bowels of the house. And there it was, Darden's war room. Maps, files, photographs pinned to boards. Red string connecting names to dates to deaths. A spiderweb of murder and greed spanning decades. And in the center of it all, the consortium's crest, a serpent swallowing its own tail. The Ouroboros. I stared at the photographs. Old men, frail women, smiling in family portraits. All dead now. All replaced by heirs who suddenly became rich, powerful, untouchable. Victor whispered, "This is bigger than Steele. Bigger than Harrow. Eleanor, this is the bloodline war. They don't just take fortunes, they erase entire families, rewrite legacies, and place themselves as the inheritors." My hands trembled with fury. I had been foolish to think Adrian and Cassandra were the architects. No. They had been puppets, strings pulled by something older, colder,
hungrier. And now the consortium wanted my grandson as their prize. We left with as much evidence as we could carry, but I knew it wasn't enough. We needed something bigger. Something undeniable. Samuel met us at the docks when we returned. You've seen them now, haven't you? How wide their net is. I nodded grimly. They want Richard Elias. They want his blood.
But they'll learn soon enough, Whitfield blood doesn't spill easy. That night, I sat by Richard Elias's crib, listening to his soft breaths. I thought of Richard, my husband, how ruthless he had been in business, how merciless in negotiations. And I wondered if this was the price of his empire, that death would follow us even after his own heart stopped. But then Richard Elias stirred in his sleep, his tiny hand curling into a fist. And I felt something I hadn't felt since the night I crawled out of the ocean. Resolve. They tried to drown me. They tried to erase me. Now they are coming for my grandson, branding him as their next heir in their bloodline war. But let me tell you this. If they want war, I'll give them a war they'll never forget. Make sure you subscribe, like, and tell us where you're streaming from, because in the next chapter, the consortium learns the one thing they've underestimated, a grandmother's wrath. Oh, you can only run from the wolves for so long before you realize the truth. If you want to survive, you don't just run. You turn. You bare your teeth. And you bite harder. That's exactly what I decided to do. The consortium thought I was prey. A helpless old woman too stubborn to let go of her fortune. But prey doesn't leave funeral wreaths at the gates of her enemies. Prey doesn't crawl out of the Atlantic and plot revenge. No. I wasn't prey. I was the hunter. And my first target was Senator William Darden. Victor, Samuel, Mylin, Caroline, and I sat around the long oak table in the mansion's study. The files we'd stolen from Darden's war room lay scattered like ashes of a fire we were about to stoke. Victor leaned forward. We can't just leak this. If we release the files as they are, the consortium will bury it with spin, lawyers, and money. We need Darden himself. We need him to confess. And how do you force a man like Darden to confess? Mylin asked, her brow furrowed. I smiled, slow, cold. By making him believe he's already won. The plan we devised was dangerous. Risky. But revenge is never safe. Caroline, nervous but determined, agreed to bait Darden with an invitation, one that seemed to come from an anonymous consortium insider. A message that whispered, Eleanor Whitfield is alive. And she's ready to negotiate the child. Victor arranged the meeting place, an abandoned ballroom on the edge of South Boston, once the site of glittering galas, now rotting in silence. And I prepared my role, the grieving, broken widow. The bait. The night of the meeting, the ballroom reeked of dust and forgotten champagne. Chipped mirrors lined the walls, reflecting our shadows like ghosts of another era. I sat in the center of the room, a shawl draped around my shoulders, my face pale with makeup to make me look weaker. On the table beside me rested a silver rattle, Richard Elias's toy, planted as the bait they could not resist. At exactly midnight, the heavy doors creaked open. Darden entered. Tall, silver-haired, his tailored suit cutting the air like a knife. Behind him, two armed men scanned the room with military precision. And then Darden smiled. Mrs. Whitfield. Alive after all. I must say, your resilience is inconvenient. I let my hands tremble, my voice crack. I don't want trouble. I just want my grandson safe. If I give him to you, will you leave me alone? Darden's smile widened, shark-like. Ah. Finally, reason. You see, Eleanor, this isn't about cruelty. It's about order. The Whitfield name carries weight. The child will secure that weight for generations. He will be raised as one of us. He will be useful. My stomach turned at the word. Useful. As if my grandson were nothing but a tool in his machine. But I kept my face fragile, my act convincing. And what about me? I whispered. Do I live? Darden chuckled. No one lives forever, Eleanor. But perhaps we can make your passing more comfortable. His men laughed. And that's when the trap snapped shut. Victor's voice boomed from the shadows. Comfortable, huh? Let's see how comfortable you are behind bars. Hidden cameras blinked to life from every corner of the ballroom. Microphones caught every word Darden had just spoken. The FBI feed, patched directly through Victor's contact, was recording in real time. Darden's face drained of color. What is this? I straightened, my hands no longer trembling. My voice sharpened to steel.
This, Senator, is the widow's gambit. You thought I was a broken old woman begging for mercy, but I'm the woman who will bury your empire. Chaos erupted. Darden's men lunged forward, guns raised. Victor fired back, his aim precise, dropping one of them instantly. Samuel charged like a bull, tackling the other into a broken mirror, shards exploding across the floor. Darden bolted for the doors. I rose, fury giving strength to my bones, and cut him off. Going somewhere, Senator? I hissed. His eyes darted around, searching for an escape. You don't know what you're dealing with, Eleanor. The consortium is bigger than me, bigger than you. Kill me, and 10 more will rise. I stepped closer, my voice low and cold. Then let them rise, and I'll cut every one of them down. By the time the FBI stormed the ballroom, the fight was over. Darden was cuffed, bleeding from a cut across his cheek, still ranting about the consortium and how nothing could stop them. But the cameras had captured everything: his confession, his arrogance, his plan for my grandson. The first domino had fallen. Back at the mansion, Caroline laid Richard Elias in his crib. I stood watching him, my heart heavy but steady. Victor joined me, his face grim. We hurt them tonight, Eleanor. But he was right about one thing. Darden is just one head of the beast. The consortium will strike back. Harder. Meaner. I touched Richard Elias's tiny hand, his fingers curling around mine. Then let them come, I whispered. I've faced the ocean. I've faced betrayal. I'll face them too. Because this child is not their pawn. He is my blood. And I will not lose him. They thought they could manipulate me. They thought I'd hand over my grandson like a pawn in their twisted bloodline war. But tonight, I showed them what happens when you play games with a widow who's lost everything. She doesn't fold. She sets the board on fire. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and tell us where you're streaming from, because in the next chapter, you'll see the consortium's counterattack. And trust me, they won't come with wreaths. They'll come with blood. The night Senator Darden fell, I thought I'd scored my first true victory. But in revenge, victories are dangerous things. They make you think you've turned the tide. They make you think the war is yours. What I didn't know, what none of us knew, was that the consortium had already marked us. And when they strike, they don't knock. They don't warn. They burn. 2 nights after Darden's arrest, the mansion slept in uneasy silence. Caroline had just put Richard Elias to bed. Victor, Samuel, Mylin, and I were gathered in the study, sifting through the fallout of Darden's capture. Victor frowned over the reports. The confession went public faster than I expected. The FBI's got him in protective custody, but the consortium will move to silence him. Samuel leaned back in his chair, shaking his head. Good. Let them waste their bullets on him. But Mylin's eyes narrowed. No. If they kill Darden, the trail to the rest of them dies with him. And Eleanor, she paused, looking directly at me, his arrest paints a target on you. They'll see you as the one who started this fire. I felt Richard Elias's rattle still in my pocket, a reminder of what was at stake. Let them come, I said. I'll be ready. I wasn't. The attack came just before dawn. I woke to the sound of shattering glass. Then, fire. The east wing of the mansion lit up like a torch. Smoke bled into the hallways. Caroline's scream ripped through the corridors. Eleanor. Richard. I ran, my bare feet slipping on the marble floor. Shadows moved in the smoke, black-clad men with rifles, silent and precise. Not thieves. Not common killers. These were soldiers. The consortium's hand. Victor met me in the hall, a pistol in one hand, a bloody cut across his forehead. They inside, Eleanor. Too many. Richard, I gasped. He nodded. Samuel's with him. Go. I tore through the smoke, lungs burning. In the nursery, Samuel stood like a wall between Richard Elias's crib and the intruders. His shotgun roared, tearing one man back into the hallway. But more were coming, boots thudding, shadows moving. Take him. Samuel shouted, thrusting Richard into my arms. I clutched the baby tight against my chest, his terrified cries piercing through the chaos. Samuel slammed the door shut, locking it, his back pressed against the wood. Go, Eleanor, he barked. I'll hold them. I wanted to argue, to stay, to fight beside him. But Richard Elias's tiny hand clutched at my blouse. His cries shook me to my bones. So I ran.
Down the servants' staircase, through smoke and splintered wood, until the night air hit my face. Behind me, gunfire cracked, shouting filled the halls, glass shattered. Then, an explosion. The east wing of the mansion collapsed in a roar of fire and stone. I stumbled into the gardens, clutching Richard, tears streaming down my face.
"Samuel," I whispered. "Gone."
Another name for the consortium's ledger.
Another name for mine.
Victor dragged me behind a crumbling wall, blood on his shirt, gun in his hand. My Lynn was with him, her face pale but alive. "We can't stay," Victor said, voice sharp. "They'll comb the grounds. We need to disappear."
My Lynn's voice trembled with fury.
"They killed Samuel."
Victor's jaw tightened.
"Then we kill them all."
"But not tonight."
I looked back at the burning mansion, my fortress, my sanctuary, reduced to ash.
Samuel's sacrifice still echoing in my ears. The consortium hadn't just struck back. They declared war.
By dawn, we were miles away, hidden in an old safe house Victor had prepared years ago. Richard Elias finally slept, his small chest rising and falling against me.
But sleep would not come for me.
I sat in the corner, smoke still clinging to my hair, Samuel's last words burning in my mind.
"Go, Eleanor. I'll hold them." He had held them.
Long enough for me to escape. Long enough for Richard to live. I swore then, with the ashes of my home still burning on the horizon, that his sacrifice would not be in vain. Victor lit a cigarette, his face grim in the dim light. "They've shown us their hand, Eleanor. They are not afraid to burn everything to the ground.
And they won't stop.
Not until Richard Elias is theirs, or dead." I looked at Richard sleeping, then back at Victor. "Then we burn them first," I said.
"Every last one of them. No more hiding. No more waiting.
They've taken my husband.
My son. My home. And now Samuel.
I'll repay them in full." Victor studied me, smoke curling from his lips.
Then he nodded. "Then it's war." They thought fire and blood would break me. They thought tearing down my walls would end the fight.
But the truth is, the mansion was just stone. Samuel's death wasn't an ending, it was fuel. If they wanted a war, they were going to get one. Stay with me, because in the next chapter, I begin my counterattack. And this time, the widow won't just bite. She'll devour. When the flames devoured my mansion, the consortium thought they'd broken me. But here's the truth about fire. Once it touches you, once it scars you, you stop fearing it. You learn to wield it. And I was ready to set the whole world ablaze. In the safe house dim kitchen, the air still smelled of smoke from our escape. Richard Elias slept in a cradle Caroline had hastily assembled. Victor leaned over a spread of maps, photos, and dossiers. My Lynn paced like a caged animal, her fury barely contained. I stood in the doorway, Samuel's shotgun clutched in my hands. It was scorched along the barrel from the fire, but it still worked. His voice still echoed in me. "Go, Eleanor. I'll hold them." I wasn't running anymore. Victor pointed to a set of photographs. "These are the consortium's anchor points. Shell companies, safe houses, and, more importantly, people. Darden was just the beginning. There's Judge Hollister, who signs off their falsified wills. Dr. Keene, their medical examiner who forges causes of death. And their enforcer, a man called Morrow. Cold, efficient, untouchable." My Lynn stopped pacing. "Not untouchable." I spoke quietly but firmly. "No. No one is untouchable anymore." Victor studied me. "You're proposing war, Eleanor. This isn't defense. This is offense." I met his gaze, steady and sharp. "They burned my home. They murdered Samuel. They tried to kill my grandson. We don't hide. We don't wait. We strike first. We strike hard." Our first move came at night. My Lynn and I sat in a borrowed sedan outside Judge Hollister's lakeside villa. He was throwing one of his infamous midnight poker games, the kind where politicians and businessmen buried secrets in whiskey and cigars. But I wasn't there for secrets. I was there for blood. When Hollister staggered outside to relieve himself, I was already waiting. "Who the hell?" he started, his fat face flushed. The crack of Samuel's shotgun cut him short. I didn't hesitate. Didn't flinch. When his body hit the ground, I whispered, "That's for Samuel." My Lynn dragged him into the shadows. No fanfare, no speeches. Just another piece off the board. From there, the strikes came in waves.
Dr. Keene was next.
He liked routine. Every Thursday evening, he left his office at 8 p.m. sharp. This time, a car swerved into his, sending him crashing into a ditch. Victor leaned on the door as the doctor coughed blood, his eyes wide with recognition.
The deaths you signed, Keene?
Every elder you sold out to Torres and her friends? Consider this your own certificate.
One silence shot to the head. Clean. Efficient.
By the time dawn broke, Hollister and Keene were corpses, and the consortium had lost 2 pillars.
But it wasn't enough. I wanted them to feel it, to fear it. So I made sure the message got out.
Anonymous packages delivered to their offices, their homes, their sanctuaries. Inside, photographs of their dead, with a note written in red ink.
For Samuel. For every elder you betrayed.
The widow is coming.
That was when the panic began.
Our informants told us board members stopped attending meetings.
Accounts were frozen.
Private security was doubled.
But paranoia only makes enemies sloppy. And sloppiness is fatal.
We caught whispers of Morrow, the consortium's so-called enforcer, being dispatched to hunt us down. Unlike the others, he didn't hide behind desks or legal briefs.
He was muscle, a butcher with a badge. Victor warned me.
Morrow isn't like Hollister or Keene. He doesn't bribe. He doesn't scheme. He kills.
I tightened my grip on Samuel's shotgun. So do I. The showdown came sooner than expected.
It was a stormy night, the rain lashing against the windows of the safe house. I heard the crunch of gravel before the alarms tripped.
Morrow had found us.
He moved like a shadow, broad, armored, a rifle slung across his chest. He cut through Victor's defenses like paper, driving him back. When I stepped into the hall, Richard Elias's cries echoing behind me, Morrow's eyes locked on me.
Cold.
Empty. The widow, he said, his voice low, almost mocking.
They were right. You're still alive. I raised Samuel's shotgun. My voice didn't shake.
Alive enough to bury you.
The fight was brutal.
Morrow slammed into me, the rifle stock cracking against my ribs. I hit the floor, breathless, stars exploding in my vision.
But rage steadied me.
Rage, and Samuel's voice.
I rolled, fired.
The blast tore into his leg, sending him crashing against the wall. He roared, his knife flashing as he lunged. We struggled in the narrow hall, his blade grazing my cheek, blood mingling with sweat and rain.
I shoved the barrel of the shotgun against his chest.
This is for Samuel, I hissed. And I pulled the trigger. Morrow's body flew back, the light gone from his eyes. When the smoke cleared, I stood shaking, blooded, but alive. Alive, and more dangerous than ever. That night, as we buried Morrow's body in a shallow grave, Victor looked at me with something like awe. You're becoming what they fear most, Eleanor. I wiped the blood from my cheek, staring into the dark.
No.
I'm becoming what they made me.
2 pillars down. Their enforcer is buried in the dirt. The consortium thought they could hunt me.
Instead, I hunted them.
But this is only the beginning.
Because fire spreads, and I won't stop until the whole rotten empire burns. Stay tuned, because in the next chapter, the consortium realizes they are not just losing members, they are losing control. And when men with power lose control, the bloodbath begins. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and tell me where you're streaming from, because trust me, you won't want to miss the next strike.
They thought the fire had ended me.
They thought Morrow, their enforcer, would silence me.
But here I was, breathing, bleeding, hunting.
And now it was time to finish it.
The consortium had grown fat on blood money, on the bodies of widows and orphans.
For decades, they whispered in courts, forged signatures, and made disappearances look like accidents.
But they made one mistake. They came for me, and they killed Samuel.
So tonight, I would burn their empire to the ground. Victor slid a folder across the table.
This is it. Every remaining member.
Names, addresses, safe houses.
Their next meeting is in Boston. One final gathering before they scatter.
They think they can regroup, go underground. I ran my finger over the names, each one etched in betrayal. My heart throbbed, but not with grief.
With focus.
Then we don't give them the chance, I said. My Lynn tightened her coat, her eyes fierce.
We hit them all at once.
No survivors. Caroline, pale but steady, whispered. And the baby? I looked at Richard Elias, asleep in his cradle.
My grandson. The only pure thing left in this storm of lies. He stays here. Safe.
By the time he wakes, the world that tried to steal him will be nothing but ash.
Boston glistened with rain as we made our way to the Beacon Grand Hotel. That's where the consortium had gathered.
Wealth dripped from every marble pillar, every gold-trimmed chandelier.
From the outside, it looked like power. But to me, it looked like a mausoleum.
Victor, my Lynn, and I moved through the shadows like wraiths. Each of us carried scars, and each of us carried fire. Inside the ballroom, laughter and clinking glasses masked the rot. Judges, bankers, heirs, they toasted their survival, blind to the storm coming through their doors.
I stepped inside, shotgun slung, coat dripping rain. Every head turned. Gasps echoed like music.
One man stammered, She's supposed to be dead.
I smiled coldly.
Reports of my death? Greatly exaggerated.
Chaos erupted. Victor and my Lynn sealed the exits.
Security reached for weapons, but I was faster. The shotgun roared, tearing through velvet silence. One by one, the consortium's pillars fell, their screams cutting through the chandelier's crystal echoes. Blood stained the marble floors where they had once danced. Judge Hollister's replacement tried to crawl away, pleading.
We can pay you, Eleanor. You want money?
Name your price.
I leveled a barrel at his chest. Money built this empire. Money killed Samuel. I don't want your money.
I want your end.
The blast shook the room. But the true spider at the center of the web was there too. Lucinda Torres, the matriarch of the consortium.
The woman who had whispered orders, tied strings, and silenced witnesses for decades. She stood tall, elegant even in terror. Her diamond necklace glittered as she hissed. You think killing us stops it? There will always be another. You can't kill greed, Eleanor. I walked up slowly, the weight of every loss pressing in my chest.
You're right. I can't kill greed. But I can kill you. She tried to draw a pistol from her purse. Foolish.
One pull of the trigger, and Lucinda Torres, the Queen of Death, fell to the marble like the rest. By the time the gunfire ended, the ballroom was silent. Only the drip of rain from my coat and the ringing in my ears remained. Victor lowered his pistol. My Lynn's chest heaved with ragged breaths. Around us, the empire of lies lay in ruins. I dropped to my knees, the shotgun slipping from my hands. For the first time since Samuel's death, I let the tears come. Hot, furious, cleansing. It's over, I whispered.
But Victor shook his head. No, not over.
It's only over when the world knows what they did.
So we made sure they knew.
The recordings, the forged documents, the bank trails. We leaked everything.
Reporters tore into the files like wolves.
The FBI swooped in, sweeping up the remnants of the consortium. Judges, doctors, heirs, all dragged into the light. News anchors called it the widow's reckoning. Headlines screamed of corruption, inheritance fraud, and a secret empire dismantled by the very woman they tried to kill.
And me? I didn't seek credit. I didn't seek praise. I sought peace.
Weeks later, I stood on a quiet cliff by the sea, Samuel's ashes in my hands. The ocean roared below, the same ocean they once tried to bury me in. I whispered into the wind. It's done, Samuel.
They can't hurt anyone anymore.
Rest easy. I let his ashes scatter, the tide carrying him into eternity.
Behind me, Richard Elias giggled in Caroline's arms.
Life, pure and innocent, in the arms of the future. My Lynn and Victor stood close, no longer allies but family. The kind forged in blood and betrayal. For the first time in years, I breathed without pain.
I didn't rebuild the mansion. I didn't need marble halls or gold chandeliers.
I needed quiet mornings, the sound of Richard Elias's laughter, and the steady presence of those who chose loyalty over greed. And sometimes, when I passed by the ruins of my old empire, I'd whisper to myself, revenge is not justice. It's colder. And colder is what they deserved.
The sharks thought they'd devour me. My son thought he could smile as I drowned. The consortium thought they could erase me like all the others.
But they were wrong.
I didn't just survive.
I ended them. This was my story, Eleanor Whitfield's story, the widow who turned fire against fire, and left nothing but ashes of the old world. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and tell me where you're streaming from. Because revenge is always best served cold.